Well, y'all got awful quiet all of a sudden. Well, my mama's not here yet. Huh? No, but she just gave me a really ugly look. I'll probably get a switch to me in a few minutes.
Mother wasn't here one time, and I called her and I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm making jelly. What are you doing?"
Well, she's here now. But good morning, Mom. It's good to see everybody here this morning. The Lord has seen fit to bless us with a overcast and drizzly day, but it's a beautiful day, and thank you for being here. One of the blessings of a drizzly, overcast day is it's not going to be hot today, so that's a blessing. But I hope all of you are doing well. See a few others trickling in. Good morning. It's good to see everybody here this morning. Alan, if you will, I ask you to lead us in prayer this morning. I hope you got one of our newsletters that Justin printed up for us. I want to draw your attention to a few things on the newsletter. First, tonight is our corn and tomato sandwich supper. That's probably my favorite of our fellowship meals year-round. It edges out the poke salad supper by just a little bit. But that's tonight, and to accommodate that meal, we're going to move our services to 5 p.m. I'm going to repeat that now. Our services tonight will be at 5 p.m. And we've moved that so that the gentleman who provides the corn and the tomatoes will be able to eat with us. Vance is starting a meeting tonight at Oak Grove, and it'll go through Thursday night, but we just didn't feel like it was right for us to enjoy the bounty of his labors without him being able to join us. So, like I said, to accommodate that, we're going to move our service back to 5, and then we'll have our fellowship meal immediately following that. Kind of in line with those things, please notice that those of us who are working with the VBS, we have a VBS meeting at 4:30 this evening before services. And there's also a men's business meeting today at 4 o'clock. So please keep those things on your minds. Also, I want to remind you of the wedding shower honoring Jerica and Danny Bagwell, and that's on July the 25th. So please keep that on your calendar. And then also, 1 week from tonight, our Vacation Bible School starts. So please keep that on your calendar, and if you are able and willing to help us with that preparation for that endeavor, it would be greatly appreciated if you do that, and just get with Justin, and I'm sure he can find something for you to do that would be a blessing to that effort. And then also we need to keep Brenda Garrison and her family in her prayers. Greg Miller, her son-in-law, passed away, and I believe the funeral is today. Is that right? The funeral is today in Gulfport, Mississippi. So please keep Brenda and her family in your prayers. As far as the sick, let me just bring a couple to your attention. Elaine Garrison, she'll have another nerve block this coming Wednesday, so please keep that in your prayers. Lois Barton will have her surgery, which was rescheduled from last week. It's scheduled for tomorrow, so please keep her in your prayer, and that is cancer surgery, so we're all concerned about that and ask you to remember her in your prayers. Also, Jana Benson, please keep her in your prayers. And then Jimmy Moody, my understanding is he had cataract surgery, so please keep him in your prayers as he recovers. Anyone else want us to mention anyone before we have prayer this morning? Greg?
I'd like to be praying for my Aunt Sue. She's not doing very well. It's my mother's sister.
Okay.
Sue knows.
Greg's aunt, Sue Nobles. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Alan, if you will. Shelley's sister? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Alan?
Our Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you this morning for this day that we have to come study the Word. We're thankful for the Word that's been given to us. Father, we know that we study it, that we will know where we're from and why we're here and where we can go if we abide by your Word and follow your faith. Father, we're thankful for Brother Don, whose ability to teach, his willingness to take time to study and prepare his lessons. Father, I pray that we will be attentive this morning. We will soak up as much of your wisdom as we can. Father, there have been many mentioned this morning who are sick, who are undergoing treatment, or who have lost loved ones. Father, we pray for them and for their families, that the things that can be done for them will be done. Father, we pray for this country we live in, for our leaders. We pray that things will turn to be more Christ-like in the future, less humanistic in the way that we've been the last few years. Father, we pray now that you would be with us throughout the rest of this service. We pray for those who cannot be here today because of sickness or other reasons. For those who are traveling, we pray for their safety. Father, most of all, we are thankful for your Son, that he gave his life for us. In his name we pray.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. All right. Over the last several weeks, we've been talking about Paul's instructions to the Ephesians about this walk, this manner of life that the Ephesians were to have. And if you'll remember, at the beginning of chapter 4, Paul encouraged the Ephesians to walk worthy of their calling. And we discussed this in depth about how that was a life worthy of the calling. Paul says that was a life of gentleness and meekness, forgiveness, and a great desire to maintain unity among the brethren. Then he went on and he said, in a negative thing, he says, I want you to walk worthy of calling, but I don't want you to walk like the Gentiles. And we talked about how that the walk of a Gentile was characterized by sexual immorality and impurity. And Paul says, you know better than that. You've been taught better than that. You know that a Christian's not supposed to walk that way or supposed to live their life that way. And then the last walk that Paul has talked about that we studied was walk in love. Paul says a Christian should walk in love. And Paul says that love that we're to walk in first is to be imitated, it's supposed to be imitated, an imitation of the love that God has for us. That's characterized by grace and patience and mercy and forgiveness. But it's also to be a love that is patterned after the love that Christ had for us. And when Christ went to the cross, the type of love that Christ exemplified on the cross as he made that sacrifice for us. So Paul says, walk worthy of calling, don't walk like the Gentiles, and then walk in love. Now, today we're going to start talking about in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 7 through 14, we're going to start talking about another walk that Paul's going to talk to us about, and that is to walk as children of light. And I want to go just start out right in the text here. So let's look at chapter 5, verse number 7. And Chris, are you there? If you would read verse number 7 for us.
Therefore, do not become partners with them. Keep reading.
No, that's fine. Therefore, do not become partners with them. Now, Paul begins this next section with that word, therefore. And Justin always reminds us, when we see the word therefore, what are we supposed to do? See what it's there for. Now, that word therefore connects what Paul's about to say with what he has just said previous. Now, previous, Paul had been talking about the wrath of God that was going to come on the sons of disobedience. Okay? Those who were disobedient to God, those who participated in a sexually immoral lifestyle, those who were covetous, and covetousness is idolatry, but those people who participated in those things, Paul warns the Ephesians here. He says, don't be partakers with them. Now,
Couple that, therefore, if you partner in their lifestyle, you're going to partner with that wrath.
Exactly. That's kind of the implication there of the therefore. If you partner in their disobedience in the lifestyle, you're going to partner with them, or you're going to participate with them in the consequences of that. Now, in the context here, what's indicated is that Paul expects the Ephesians to be separated from the world. Paul is encouraging them to separate themselves from the immoral aspects, the immoral acts of the world that was typical of the world. Now, in the next verse, Paul is going to give a positive reason for refusing to be partakers in the sins of the world. Now let's go on and read verse number 8. William, have you got that? Would you read verse number 8 for us?
For ye were sometimes darkness, but now are ye light in the Lord. Walk as the children of light.
Okay, so Paul here says that the positive reason for refusing to be partakers in the sins, in those sins of the world, is what? You're what? You're children of light. Now, I want us to think about that for just a minute. I'm going to read this out of the ESV. Paul says there in verse number 8, he says, for at one time you were darkness. Now, what time is Paul talking about there? At one time you were darkness. What? When you were living in sin, Vance? Pre-conversion. Okay, exactly. Before they had become Christians, they were darkness. Now I want you to notice here, Paul doesn't say before you were converted you were living in darkness. What does he say, Ryan? You were darkness. Okay? Before you became a Christian, you were darkness. Okay? So before they became a Christian, they were darkness. But then he goes on and says there in verse 8, but now what is that referring to? After their conversion. But now, since you're a Christian, now that you're a Christian, he says, you are light in the Lord. Now, he doesn't say you're living in the light of the Lord or you're in the light of the Lord, but what is he saying? You are what? You are light in the Lord. You are light. So, pre-conversion, before they became a Christian, they were darkness. After their conversion, they were light. They were light in the world. Okay? So, the Christians at Ephesus, and us today as well, we're different. We're supposed to be different than we were before we became Christian, aren't we? Now, I don't know about you, I'm going off script here, but I was baptized when I was 11 years old. Some of you may have become a Christian at a much later date in your life. But when I was 11 years old, there's a lot of darkness, we might say, that just naturally wouldn't have been in my life. Is that fair to say? Okay. Compared to someone who's maybe in their 20s or 30s or older. But even that being said, when we become a Christian, there's something different about us. Before we were darkness, but now we are light. So those outside of Christ are characterized as the darkness. Those who are in Christ are characterized as the children of light, or light. Now, Paul's going to go on here, and he is going to explain to us what it means to be children of light. First, he's going to tell us about some fruit that children of light are to produce. And let's go on and read verses 9 and 10. Bo, do you have that? Would you mind reading verses 9 and 10 for us, please? Okay, so Paul says here that there's a fruit that is produced by these children of light. Now, when he's talking about something producing fruit, what analogy there is Paul talking about? What is he using? Philip, what kind of analogy is Paul using when he refers to producing fruit? Do what? A tree or a vine or a plant in your garden. This evening I'm going to get to enjoy my first tomato sandwich of the year, and I'm looking forward to that. You know, there's just something about a garden-raised tomato, isn't there? I don't know what they have in the grocery stores, but it must be a different species of tomato. But we're going to enjoy the fruits of that tomato plant this evening and that corn plant. We're going to be able to enjoy the fruits of those. So by using that word fruit, Paul is metaphorically depicting the light, the children of light, as fertile ground, maybe a garden spot, fertile garden spot, or a vine, as Philip said, that produces fruit. And Paul says that the thing that is produced by those children of light, Paul says that it's goodness, righteousness, and truth. And I want us to discuss those three things real quickly. Goodness, righteousness, and truth. In just everyday language, what would you think of when you think of the word goodness? Good works, okay? Good works, being kind to other people, okay? Looking for opportunities to do things that bless other people. What about righteousness? Righteousness, what do you think about? Faithful, okay? Doing the thing that's right as opposed to doing the thing that's wrong. And maybe doing what's right as opposed to neglecting doing what is wrong. What do you think about the word truth? Being truthful, okay. What would be the opposite of being truthful? Falsehood, okay. Lying, falsehood. Now, these three fruits that Paul talks about here, goodness and righteousness and truth, these are characteristic of the life of a child of light. They are the characteristics of a child of light. And bearing this fruit, Christians fulfill their role as light. Now, in verse number 10, Paul says that these children of light, they try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. What does the King James Version use there for that word discern? Prove. What, Sarah? Okay, proving what is acceptable. So, okay, finding out. So that's to discern. I remember, I can't remember who it was now, but one of our speakers, they had, one of the things they talked about was discerning. What was that? When did we study about that? Ted Burleson, yeah, during our meeting. He talked about discerning. What does it mean? Yolanda, don't smile at me. I'm lucky to remember that much. But what does it mean to discern? It means to find something out. It means to prove something if it's right or wrong. So As a child of light, one of our obligations is to discern what pleases God. To discern what pleases God. When a person knows what God expects of them, we can do what? We can make good decisions. We can make the right decisions, and we can prove faithful to God, and we can show God that we love Him and we can please Him. If we don't know what pleases God, if we haven't discerned what pleases God, then can we please Him? No, there's no way we can please Him. If someone doesn't know what to do, then they can't do the right thing.
John, I think when I go through the word, I turn it around backwards. Truth is the doctrine that we know from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Righteousness is the right decision making. Goodness is carrying it out. That's good. It's based on making the right decision and understanding truth.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go on through. But if we know what God expects of us, then we can please God. If we don't know, then it's impossible for us to please God. So, living as a child of light, we live in goodness, we live in righteousness, we in truth. And very simply put, that means that we're doing what's necessary to please God. That's very simple. Living a good life, living a righteous life, living a life of truth is simply put what pleases God. Now, let's go on to the next few verses. I want us to read verse number 11 now. And Greg, would you read verse number 11 for us?
And have no fellowship with the unfaithful works of darkness, but rather reprove them.
Okay. Now, Paul here says that as a child of light, you remember he said, walk as a child of light. We're not to have fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. Now, what does it mean to have fellowship? Okay, that's the same thing as participate. So Paul, again here, he reiterates that don't participate in those works of darkness. Yes, sir.
Jesus was accused of fellowshipping with sinners when he was actually working with them.
That's a really good point.
To help and teach them not to participate.
That's really, yeah.
We can get accused about it, but we have to not let Satan convince us that we're being accused.
Yeah, and that's a different twist on that word fellowship. Jesus fellowship with sinners, but we are not to fellowship, not necessarily with sinners, but with what? Their works. The sin. The works of darkness. That's very good. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. Very good point. So here Paul says then, don't fellowship, don't participate in those works of darkness. Now again, and I hate to keep beating this in the head, but what are some of those works of darkness, those unfruitful works of darkness? Sexual immorality, uncleanness, covetousness. These are the things that Paul's talking to the Ephesians about in here in chapter 5. Now, I want you to notice that not only does Paul say, don't fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but he also said that it's our responsibility to do what? To expose them. To expose them. Now, what does that word expose mean to you? Bring it out into the open. A couple weeks ago, Teresa and I, she made some cabbage slaw. And she makes really good cabbage slaw, by the way. But she made some cabbage slaw, and we had a little left over, and we decided to put that down the garbage disposal. Now, make a mental note, that's not a good idea. Cabbage slaw and a garbage disposal do not work well together. So following Saturday, Elijah and I were underneath my crawl space in my kitchen, cutting out a section of the drain line because that cabbage slaw had gotten down to a certain point and stopped. And I didn't know cabbage slaw would turn into concrete, but it turned into concrete. So, but before I did that, I bought this little thing right here. Chris told me to buy this. And you put it on your head and you mash this button right here and it turns on. Because in my crawl space underneath my kitchen is one of the darkest places I have ever been on the face of the earth. Why did I need that light? Ryan, why did I need that light? To see what I was doing. I needed to expose that pipe so that I could see what I was doing. That light uncovered the darkness, and I could see what I needed to work on. I could see what I needed to work on. Now, when we think about Christians exposing the works of darkness, how do Christians do that? Now, we're light, and we're to expose the works of darkness. But how do we do that? What are the ways in which we do that, John?
I think one way is just by showing a difference. One of my teachers told a story about the old Aladdin lamp, which was a souped-up version of a kerosene lamp.
Mm-hmm.
And he said the guy wouldn't get in there and say, "Man, your light is pitiful." He'd just say, "Light your light up." And then he would light his up, and you couldn't even see the other one. It was so much brighter. I think the world is looking, but they're not seeing that bright light from us enough.
Yeah.
And it exposes. I mean, you don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to put. I mean, there are times when you do need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just if they see us living the life here as a group, as God's family here, that's going to show them a difference. They can still make their choice, but it is going to present them something, an option.
Exactly. I think about two ways that I want to talk to you about how we as Christians expose the works of darkness as being children of light. And one's in word and one's in deed, okay? And we're going to talk about it. I want us to discuss that. I want you to be thinking about those. How do we expose the works of darkness by word and by deed? But before we do that, I want us to talk about how Christians shouldn't expose darkness. Huh? Okay, explain.
Well, why don't we live like our lives?
Okay, we need to live the right way, okay. But when I think about ways we shouldn't, okay, back earlier in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, Paul tells the Ephesians to speak the truth, but speak the truth in what? In love. Speak the truth in love. Now, I want us, as we think about this and we discuss this, I want us to remember that principle, okay? Speak the truth in love. So, using that as kind of the guiding principle then, how are some ways that a Christian shouldn't expose the works of darkness? Do what? Okay, by being hateful. How can we be hateful? How are some of the ways that we can be hateful? Okay. Okay. How are some of the ways we see people in our world today? They may have the right intentions. They may want to expose darkness, but they do it in the wrong way. How are some of the ways that they do that? What? Gossip. Okay. Gossip. That's a good way. What? Facebook. That's where I'm going. Facebook. How many times I have seen husband and wives calling each other out on Facebook? Have you ever seen that? Everybody has. You don't. It's just it blows my mind. I think when we're sitting there behind our computer screen or our phone screen or whatever, we have this sense of anonymity, but in reality, Facebook is the least anonymous thing that we could ever do, isn't it? And we think that we can post something on Facebook, and in some way that's going to have a correcting effort to help somebody else. But what does it normally do when you call somebody out in a public arena like that? What? It makes them mad. It pushes them away. They automatically become defensive, right? And it brings you down to their level. So that's one thing. I don't think there's no. Yes, sir.
I think there's two things going on. Number one, you have to expose as in identify, and then you have to expose as in correct. And I think that when you see egregious behavior, that you have to identify it. If you see a sixth grader beating up a first grader to take something that's sort of right, you have to stop the sixth grader. You have to expose it. You have to stop him because that's what love requires. And I think we're not careful. We're mixing those two up, even while we're discussing this right now. If we see, say, pedophilia, we have to call it out, not in warm fuzzy terms, knowing that we're trying to get the best outcome for the pedophile as well as for children, but sometimes there has to be a hard edge on it, and then you have to take corrective measures. So you can't put them all under the same roof.
Yeah, that's true. There's different appropriate responses for different types of darkness, we might say. And I understand what you're saying. But again, the calling someone out in a public arena, not necessarily, that good of an idea. What are some other ways that we might have a negative impact if we tried to expose the works of darkness? We talked about just maybe being harsh, having an argument with someone. Chris?
Being hypocritical if we're
Being hypocritical.
maybe guilty of the same thing or something else.
That's exactly right. So I just want us to, and Steve brought up a really good point there, but I just want us to understand that there's a right way to expose darkness and there's a wrong way to expose darkness. And I want us to focus on that right way. And again, it's got to start under the heading of speaking the truth in love. Now, we find principles, and I want us to go over, let's turn over to Matthew chapter 18. And again, under the heading of exposing darkness, I want us to read, starting with verse number 15. And again, this is some overriding principles that I think we need to consider when we talk about exposing darkness. Jesus says here in verse number 15, he says, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone." Now, does that eliminate Facebook? Yes. Absolutely, right there. That's Facebook, no Facebook. He goes on and says, "If he listens to you, you have gained your brother." Verse number 16. "But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses." Verse 17. "If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, and if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector." So what's the fundamental principle here about exposing darkness that we see here that Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 18? What's the first step? Go to the person face to face and try to talk out your differences. If that doesn't work, then what's step number 2? Take 1 or 2 brethren with you. And then if that doesn't work, what do? You take it before the church. Now, I want to tell you, if we followed those principles right there, when we talk about conflict resolution, this world would be a much, much, much better place, and Facebook would probably go out of business. It really would. But, and by the way, this is being streamed probably over Facebook right now, so I may be in Facebook jail when we get out.
Not another thing is when we expose it, and we have to expose It's our Christian responsibility, but we also need to be ready to offer what to do about it.
Exactly.
Because the girls in the jail, lots of times, they don't want necessarily to be like they are or in the situation they are, but because of background, circumstances, whatever, they don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
That's just their lifestyle, and that's one of the things we as Christians, we show them, number one, that we love them, but we've got to do more than just show them.
You got to be prepared to show an alternate. Yeah, an alternate. That's a very good point. Very good point. Do what? Oh. There are good things. Yes, I would admit fully there are good things about Facebook. And yes, sir.
You also say, exposing darkness. We're all real good at exposing someone else's darkness in our lives. But it really comes down to the truth and love. When we expose their darkness and do it in a manner of showing that we care and we love the individual.
Mm-hmm.
We're not exposed to each other's darkness. We've all got it. It's easy to point them out at other people. But as Christians, we're going to set ourselves apart from the world and quit pointing the finger at everybody else. And let's point back to the Bible. Let's look at it for each person.
Mm-hmm.
The darkness can grow, and the light that is exposing the darkness can grow as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's growth on both sides.
Good point.
One of my favorite Facebook scriptures, this is pro Facebook, for those that are listening, is, and it sounds like verse 8 in the text we read, every Christian has his past, but every sinner has his future.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we remember and realize how easily we could be the person that we're dressing down, it keeps us humble. It doesn't keep us quiet. But we have to do it with humility and love. And
Good point.
Because consider yourself. Take that plank out of your eye. But that doesn't mean you still don't see. You've got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
True in the Matthew 18 discussion, there's never a time for taking it to the public.
Yeah.
It's one person, then two or three in the church, and there's nothing after that. Once the church as an aggregate has tried to correct that person, say, I go astray, you guys come to me and go, hey, you need to come back. It's over. There is literally nothing that the Bible indicates will help as far as getting on Facebook and bashing man, etc.
Well, I think, and this is just my observation. So if it's not what you've observed, forgive me. But some of the ways that we try to expose light are the easy things to do. It's easy for me to get on my computer or my phone and type something out. That's easy. Going over to Ryan's house and me and him sitting down and having an uncomfortable conversation, that's hard. That's hard. So I think sometimes we're just going the path of least or less pain than what we ought to do. And I will agree with my mom. There's good things about Facebook. There's good things about Facebook. So do what? You better. Yeah, I better. Okay. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes.
That in 15 where it says if your brother sins against you, I think we need to be real careful about making sure that we've studied enough that maybe we know that whatever we think our brother has sinned against us is a sin. And not just take this as a license just to go and create trouble, I guess is what
I agree. I agree with that completely. All right, let's go back to Ephesians now. We're going to jump down to let's continue talking about exposing darkness for just a moment. I told you earlier that I wanted you to think about how we expose darkness in word and in deed. Let's talk about deed for just a minute. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but how do we expose darkness in deed? By the things that we do and the things that we don't do. How do we expose darkness? Sandra was talking about it before. By the life that we live, by being children of light, we show an alternative to the darkness. Okay? We show an alternative to the darkness. I'm going to go off script again here for just a moment, but Marcus, Chris's son, and Elijah and I, we went to a trade show a couple weeks ago, and it was in Las Vegas. And we met with some of our vendors over there, and they took us out to eat. And one of the first things they wanted to know was, what do you want to drink? And they weren't talking about ice water or sweet tea either. They were talking about a cocktail. And all three of us said, well, we don't drink. Well, they had a real perplexed look on their face for just a moment, but in the aftermath, nobody at the table had anything to drink. Now, the fact that we shed our light just a little bit, I don't know what they did after we left the restaurant, but while we were shedding our light just a little bit there at dinner, we had a positive impact on those people. Do the people you work with, do they know that you don't curse? If they know you don't, do what?
I have a little thing that if I hear somebody say something out loud, I tell them to go get in the corner.
Go get in the corner.
They will not say that. Patterns will put in the corner.
Again, I'm going to use a personal experience that I had. It's kind of along the lines that Deborah, I used to call on those customers over in Boaz, and I had somebody tell me one time that when I came in the office, the language in the office completely changed. Now, I'm not patting myself on the back. I mean, that's the way I am. But, just the fact that they knew that I didn't approve of that, they completely changed. Now, like I said, I don't know what happened once I left. But because I shined that light for just a little bit, it changed the complexion of their conversation. So do the people you work with, do they know how you talk? Because you can expose those works of darkness by the way that you live, the things that you do and the things that you don't do. Now, let's talk about how we expose the works of darkness with words. How can we expose those works of darkness with our words?
Well, I think the thing I used to do was like call the customers. If they started cursing or the bad language, I would just tell them that I'm just shocked because I just thought you were
You're smarter. Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and listen to them and try to help you, but I'm not going to curse. But especially the young people, I just say, you just always try to spend so much more person that's going to tell them these things. And a lot of times it's just amazing how they will change their mind.
Yeah. I'm going off script. I'll brag on my wife. Teresa and I went to Auburn one time to watch an Alabama-Auburn game. Alabama lost, and we were on the shuttle going back to where we had parked, and there was a bunch of Alabama fans on there, and they were really unhappy. And some of the worst language that I have heard, and my young daughter and son were sitting there beside us, and my wife called that whole bus out. Now, I'm sitting there, Steve, I'm thinking I'm fixing to get whooped. But, that completely changed. I mean, everybody, it embarrassed everybody on that bus. And, my wife called them out for using that type of language with young children on that bus. Of course, it shouldn't have mattered if it was young children or old children. But what Linda was saying, sometimes we can respectfully, call people out. What are some other ways that with our words that we can expose the darkness? I think about as a church, And this is, we talked about this for years and years, but it's kind of getting real now. But the things that we teach from our pulpits and from the podiums in our classes, we have to be prepared to speak the truth in love. And sometimes those topics are not going to be socially acceptable. And I don't want to get into politics here. That's not my purpose. But we all know this. There's some topics now, some hot button topics that are socially unacceptable. And, there's going to be, in the future, there's probably going to be some consequences. If we continue to teach on homosexuality, if we continue to teach on sexual immorality and same-sex marriage, and just the list goes on and on and on. There's some sins, some darkness that we're not teaching about like we probably should, just because it might step on some of our members' toes. It might step on my toes. So we have to be prepared as a congregation to support teaching from our pulpit and from our podiums in our classes, scripturally sound, doctrinal teaching about these works of darkness. So we can expose the darkness in two ways, in words and in deeds. In deeds by the life that we live, the example that we live before others, showing people an alternative to the life of darkness. And then secondly, we can do so by the words that we use, the way we speak to other people, the things that we teach. So these are the things kind of that I've been thinking about as far as exposing the darkness. Now, one thing I want to mention before we go, Paul, in verse number 12, he says that those things that we're going to expose, some of those things are so disgraceful that we ought not to even talk about amongst ourselves. And we're seeing some of that today in our world today, and it probably has been there in history, but today it's not something that's done in the darkness. It's done on TV and in the movies and in our music. So we need to understand that the things that we're going to expose are very, very distasteful. Okay, we'll stop right there, and we'll begin next week with verse number 15. Thank you for your comments and your tips.
I can do the sound.
Yeah, there we go.
But I don't think we want to do that. Okay. May not ever get through. I got so many announcements, there's so many one-liners in my monologue here.
You're the one-liner that's going to come to us, man.
It's a bunch. You're actually in one of them.
Oh, no, don't say that.
It's good. Good morning, Double Springs Church of Christ. Thank you for being here. We see some folks that are visiting with us today and others that we're so glad to see today. July the 11th, or as we like to call it, Cornado Sunday. Cornado, that sounds a little bit like Sharknado, if some of you get that reference. Although that was a terrifying movie, the only thing terrifying about Cornado Day is if you don't get enough to eat. And if you come and are willing, I don't think that'll be possible from what I've heard, all that has been going into preparing for it. We have a good number this morning. Eddie's working on that. He said he wanted to get a good count, and I told him a story. One time Brother Nichols preached at a meeting just a couple of miles from my house, and there were 51 people there. And so Brother Nichols got up and said, we've got between 50 and 500 people here today. Now, you talk about a preacher count, that is one, but he'll get us one in a few minutes. We probably don't need James Spann to tell us that it's raining, and it's going to rain, and it has been raining. So instead of James Spann, we've got Ryan Spann. He'll be leading our singing. There may be a relation, maybe not. I told him I was going to mention him in my lead up this morning. Then Justin will be bringing our sermon this morning. No. That's 2 weeks in a row this has been wrong. Vance will be bringing our sermon this morning. Okay. All right. Sorry, Vance. On the table this morning, we have Alan Hatcher, Scott Gower, and Kenneth Whittemore. Our opening prayer is Steve Christian, and our closing prayer this morning will be Tim Hodge. Vance, who is with us, and by special arrangement, we'll talk about those again in a minute, will get to be with us for the corn and tomato supper today. Then he gets in and he goes to Oak Grove. He'll have a meeting there Sunday through Thursday, if I did the math right. And it's at 7 each night, I guess, after a night at least. Don wants to take a bus Tuesday night and be here about 6:10. You might want to let him know, give him a heads up on how many are interested or wanting to go with him, but he's planning on doing that Tuesday night. All right, now, announcements for tonight and before tonight. 4 p.m. men's meeting with the elders, 4:30 p.m. VBS meeting, and then evening service at 5. You're hearing that correctly, at 5 p.m. today, and after that we have Cornado. I thought about going to Children of the Cornado, but that's another one, so we don't need to go there. You can't think about a tomato sandwich without thinking about Virginia West. I mean, we love her and we miss her. We know she would be there. I talked to John Lair. He said she wanted to be here. She ate tomato sandwiches before anybody I know ate tomato sandwiches. And she should be the spokesperson for tomato sandwiches. But we certainly want to encourage everyone to enjoy that time with us. We got 114 here this morning. So between 100 and 500, that's good. 114 and 500. The wedding shower that's next week, right? 2 weeks, okay, the 25th. That's the date I had on it, but if you saw my notes, you'd understand why I'm confused. And that's for Jerica Bagwell, and that's going to be 2 weeks after service is on that day. VBS, only 1 week away. Panic time or work time or both, however you want to call it. But that starts next Sunday night and it'll go through Wednesday. This week, our summer series, and going back to last week, if you got to hear or see the lesson we had Wednesday night with Dietrich Wallace, I know you were blessed by that. I know I was. You can find him on YouTube. It's not hard to find, Dietrich Wallace. But this Wednesday night, I've got some letters written after this guy's name is Philip Hines. I've heard him speak a couple of occasions. And what I wrote after his name was HCBI. He can bring it. Now, I don't know if he'll be calm or not when he's here, but I've seen him before, and he can really deliver and does so quite powerfully. So that's Wednesday night. Those are the announcements. I may have some more things that go within them, but now we get to turn the page to some sad things, some sickness and death. Greg Miller passed away, and that funeral will be today in Gulfport, Mississippi. And he's son-in-law of Brenda Garrison. We want to remember her and them as they are undergoing that even this day. Remember, Elaine Garrison will have the nerve block, and then also in the family of Clyde and Elaine is Bing Green, and we want to remember that family in so many ways, our hearts and our prayers and whatever we can do to help them. All death is tragic, but when you hear of the death of a first grader, young Bryce Heron from Addison passed away, and we want to remember that family, that child, and that it just hurts so much. Chelsea Mann is his mother, if that gives a context for some of you. Galen Whitaker would ask for our prayers, and I didn't make the connection, but that's the husband of Lisa Whitaker. Many of you know Lisa, and so we want to remember them as well. Also, Libby Grimmett's husband, Scott Grimmett, is in very serious condition at this time, and we want to remember that family. Lois, we got rescheduled Monday. I hope we can get that done this time, and we certainly remembering you. Let's not forget the Cavenders. They're still going through some tough times. Scott and Reba as well. Danny Pinkard, Tim and Kathy. Well, I can't read my writing, but I know who the rest of these are. There's so many others that we talked about in our class this morning. I saw the Rays. They came in. We're glad to see them with us today. Remember Christine George and Lavonia Walker, Louise House, and Sue Knowles. Sue Knowles was also mentioned in class, Jimmy Moody, and that looks like about everything I've got. Anything that you know of and need to mention at this time? Big day, great family to be with, a lot to listen to, but thank you so much. Now we'll turn our singing over to Ryan's band.
Number 501 will be our first song this morning. 501. We'll sing all three verses. Oh, worship the